Hi everyone, I'm Jocelyn, and I am grateful you're here. You're listening to the Starting with Gratitude podcast. This is a safe space intended to host meaningful conversations exploring all topics of the human experience. Every conversation starts with gratitude and remains rooted in gratitude. After you listen, make sure to join the community by subscribing and sharing. I am so happy you have joined us. Hello, Manoj.
Hi, Jocelyn.
How is your spirit doing this morning?
Spirit is doing really great this morning. I feel full, I feel positive, and I have a renewed energy, I feel. Spiritually, but my body's pretty tired this morning. It's been a big week.
Yeah. And, prior to us starting recording this, I brought up that I love how you are in tune with how your body is feeling, and we're going to get into that. But I'm going to go ahead and invite you to share with us what it is that you feel grateful for.
I feel grateful for LA today, for sure. I'm kind of new to LA. I've been here about 7 months. And I've struggled in those 7 months to feel like this is home, especially coming from New York and Melbourne. But this morning I woke up early. Me and a friend went for a hike, and was really incredible just to be out in nature and, to be near Malibu and see the water and be in the mountains was a special moment. So I feel very grateful for this place I'm in right now.
I love that. I also really love starting my mornings hiking. I love the hikes here in LA. I'm also fairly new to LA, and I feel like it's the hikes that have honestly had me fall in love with this city and just how much access we actually have to nature in a city like this.
Do you have a favorite hike yet?
I do actually. There's this place that I've been going to a lot called Franklin Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, but there's a bunch of different trails there, and there's a little lake there. And it's just so beautiful. I have been feeling really called in this season to be amongst the trees. I think that's because I really needed to ground myself. Prior to this season, I felt really called to be by the water. And I think that's because I was in a season of having to cleanse myself. Ooh, a lot of awareness has been coming in these recent seasons of life. But yeah, highly recommend Franklin Canyon if you have not visited that yet.
I have not, but I'm going to put that on my list, sure.
I am really excited to have this conversation with you. I stumbled upon you through a previous podcast guest, Jonathan. And when I saw your page and was just kind of, getting a feel for who you are and what you share, you just exert like a very calm and welcoming energy. And when I saw more of like what you do and what you've done, I'm just like excited to get into all of it and share it with our community. So thank you so much for being here and for your time and energy.
No, Jonathan is a dear friend of mine, and I'm very happy to be following him and to be in conversation with you today.
One question that I love starting these conversations with is, how would you describe your current season of life?
Oh, I feel like I'm in fire season right now. I feel like this bushfire is kind of raging in my life, and it's tumultuous, that's for sure. I'm going through a lot of change at the moment, lots of endings, lots of rebirths, and feeling very much a sense of displacement. So I think, a large wildfire feels like a good way to describe it. I'm finding myself just in new territory, after many years of being in Australia and living between Melbourne and New York, where I had a lot of friends and family. This was in a pre-COVID world. To
Mhm.
being in a new city, having very few friends and family at this point, and navigating lots of change for sure. So there's a lot of growth here, but I do feel like I'm at a point where I'm just witnessing all the passings. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For those that are listening or watching this and are trying to understand like what it means to witness your life, how would you really describe that for those who don't really fully understand or grasp that concept yet?
I don't know if it's necessarily witnessing your life. I think that feels very abstract for most people. I think it's being present to our moments. That's probably a better way to wrap your head around it. And what that really means is being in observation of everything that is occurring at this moment. And we
Mm-hmm.
can be in observation of things without necessarily being yanked around by those same things. And so, stress is one thing, or anxiety is one thing. We can be present to it, we can hold it, we can witness it, and we can feel it completely. But we don't have to be thrown around by it. We don't have to be taken by it. And we don't have to be completely upended by those experiences. So,
Mm-hmm.
observing really is a way of saying we're holding space for whatever is arising in this moment, to just be there, without a sense of aversion towards it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you being in this season where you are experiencing a lot of change, I feel like many of us are really experiencing still a lot of change even after last year.
Mm.
How do you navigate big changes in your life and not allow them to keep you from like being grounded and centered?
Um, I think it's really important to have some sort of practice that, first of all, cultivates that within us.
Mm,
Um, and also understand that that practice isn't always going to save you in every moment. Um,
mm,
so with meditation practice, and I've had one for 14, 15 years now, the practice just helps me recognize that life is always inherently unstable. And no matter how much I practice meditation, it will always have ups and downs, things that
mm,
are pleasant and things that are unpleasant. And it allows me to cultivate a sense of equanimity towards them. And equanimity is just our ability to meet life just as it is.
mm,
So a grounding practice is really important, and that can be something like a yoga or meditation practice. It can be getting out into nature and going for hikes. It can be a very solid group of empathetic friends. Whatever that is for you, it's so vital and critical, not just for our mental health, but also our physical and emotional health. And also, I think over time, maturity and wisdom naturally come from observing our life go through these cycles of birth and death. So
mm.
that's really part of the human experience.
Yeah, yeah. And you having had this meditative practice and these rituals in your life for about 15 years, you mentioned, what experience happened in your life 15 years ago that brought you to your practice?
Yeah, there's probably many, many experiences, but and I don't know if it was necessarily just one.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was always living outside of my body. That's probably one way to describe it. I was spending a lot of time in my head and in my mind, very disconnected from my feeling state and my body. And so this culminated in a bunch of different ailments, from insomnia to anxiety to depression to addiction, and different afflictions that come when we are so disconnected. But at the root cause of that whole experience was really not being in my body, was wanting to be anywhere but my body, because I couldn't accept what was there. And what was there was fear, was pain, was sadness, was worry, was stress, was probably all of the above.
Mm-hmm.
And the culmination of that was a pretty serious anxiety attack that happened one day at work
Mm-hmm.
that really led me down lots of different paths, from conventional to not so conventional, to eventually randomly saying yes to a friend who wanted to take me to a yoga class because he told me there were lots of pretty girls there.
Mm-hmm.
And then that serendipitously led me down the path of meditation and meeting my teacher, and kind of this state of transformation that naturally occurred within me.
I mean, I'm sure in the beginning you explored many different kinds of practices. What inspired you or made you so passionate to lean more into meditation specifically?
Um, I knew that meditation was always going to be the hardest for me to conquer, because I had a mind at that point that was just so very scattered and fragmented, and I couldn't, be focused, or I couldn't really be present to a lot of things, even though I did yoga and all those different practices. And so there was an intuitive understanding that if my mind is causing me all the problems, then I need to learn to train it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew deep within me that what would be the hardest would probably be also the best for me. But over time, the more I practiced it, the more I realized that things outside of me were starting to change. And when I say outside of me, like, my friends were noticing I was more present to them. My
Mm-hmm.
girlfriend was noticing I was kinder and my tone and my language had changed. I was able to sustain attention and awareness a lot longer when I was playing with my daughter or when I was at work. And so there were little moments along the way that I didn't necessarily become so aware of that other people started to become aware of. And so it was a gradual path and a gradual practice. But also my internal state changed, like what I was motivated by before when I was, in the world of marketing and advertising,
Mm-hmm.
and what I was chasing and what I thought would bring me lots of happiness and fulfillment didn't feel real, and
Mm-hmm.
connections and friendships that didn't feel authentic also started to not interest me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to feel my life moving into a state of alignment with nature, really. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was just starting to very gradually and subtly change. And eventually I realized, the more I can be present to myself, I can actually be present to the rest of the world in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you were mentioning, you realizing that your interests were shifting, your focus, your fulfillment, I feel like that in itself is an aspect of a spiritual awakening. And I feel when you are in that transitional space, it can sometimes feel disassociating in a way or existential in a way. Did you experience that in your shifts?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember pretty vividly after coming back from my first Vipassana retreat in Bali, 10 days or 7 days, I can't remember. We were in Bali just meditating for up to 13 hours in the most beautiful, location in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
then coming out of that and going to Ubud or somewhere like that, which was just hustling and bustling, and there was lots of energy, just feeling very like, whoa, like, what is this? But then also moving to a very different pace than what I was used to. I think when you're spending that much time meditating in the jungle and in the forest, and then you're thrown back into the world, you realize how unnatural it can feel at times to
Mm-hmm.
move at the pace that many of us are moving in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas moving at the pace of nature is a lot more subtle and a lot more grounding for our nervous system. Um, I was very aware that it's not normal, like to drink 3 or 4 coffees a day and just to be focused on sitting behind a computer, and just from moving from the computer to the phone to the computer. And it was very disassociating. And you also lose this sense of identity as well. You know, when you spend so much time in practice, the identity you've crafted around being a man, a woman, the identity you've crafted around being a founder of a company or a meditation teacher or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, all of this starts to fall away, and there's a recognition that there is no inherent sense of self. There is a consciousness and an awareness that is in this moment that is also working symbiotically with everything else in nature. And that's very healing, you know, the real recognizing the interconnection between us and everything. And it's also very disconcerting.
Yeah. I'm currently reading this book that's reminding me of what we're currently talking about. It's called The Surrender Experiment. Have you read it?
I'm actually reading it now as well.
Oh, yeah. You know how in the beginning he is just introducing us to how he realized one moment that like shifted the rest of his life, you know, that he is the observer of his thoughts, that, you know, oh, wait, there's this voice in my head and I'm realizing I'm not that voice. And he went, you know, on this passion. He developed this burning passion to like figure that out, and has spent and dedicated so much of his time to just meditating. And he ended up building this, I don't know how far along you are, but he, you know, built his home and just in like away from people so he could just be in solitude and just be in nature and completely focus on really quieting down the mind and having control over the voice in your head. Do you feel like you've been learning something from that book so far, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think at the point where he's just finished building that little cabin with his college friends, and I haven't gone to any juicy parts yet, I feel.
Oh, okay.
But I do feel like even just the idea of surrendering to life is something that we can all learn from, especially when we're going through change. You know, much of Buddhism really teaches us that a lot of our suffering is exacerbated by our reluctance to accept the present moment just as it is. And so surrendering is for me almost a synonym for, you know, just accepting this moment just as it is.
Yeah. Surrendering was and is such a huge theme for me that like really reintroduced itself last year. And I'm sure many people can relate to this because of just the unprecedented experiences that we all had. And we truly had to surrender to what was going on. Because if not, the resistance was just going to make, you know, the experience much harder. You, from what I'm aware of, are rooted in Buddhist wisdom. Were you raised with that upbringing?
Yeah, I think my teachings these days are primarily influenced by Buddhist wisdom, but I have definitely learned and am more and more influenced by Western psychology, positive psychology, breath work, lots of different modalities and practices. But it all started for me, yes, like raised in a Buddhist household and developing a fascination with monks from a very young age. They used to come to our house and perform ceremonies. And when I migrated, or my family migrated to Australia when I was 6, a big part of that I lost for sure. We didn't have access to temples like we did back home. But I was still very much connected to a sense of spirituality. Even though from a young age I didn't understand what it was, I felt that there was something deeper than just these individual experiences we were going through. I felt that there was something greater, but I didn't really understand what it was at that point.
Yeah. I, you know, I wanted to ask you as a follow-up to this and your upbringing with, you know, Buddhist religion and culture, how your relationship with Buddhism may have evolved as you have evolved into your own spirituality.
Great question. Yeah, I think Buddhism in Sri Lanka is very much um, treated as a religion in the conventional way, where there is a sense of duty. You would go each quarter or each month or each week, and you would pray. You would offer gestures to the monks, to the temples, but the meditation practice was really not part of um, Buddhism in Sri Lanka. It's like that throughout most of South Asia and Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the focus is more on one of the other parts of the canon, which is known as ethics. So the belief is that we can live in a way that's ethical and harmonious and doesn't cause harm. And that tends to be what people really focus on more than the cultivation of the mind and the purification of the mind through
Mm-hmm.
meditation practice. So
Mm-hmm.
it initially started off as being a very dualistic framework for me, like being quote unquote a god, even though Buddha really isn't seen as a god. Like that was how I perceived it to be. And
Mm-hmm.
then me praying to a god. But then I think as I grew up, I realized, the Buddha really is a representation of someone that has awakened from their own suffering. And
Mm-hmm.
in very simplistic terms, I think of it as someone that was depressed, someone that found a way to not be depressed by training their mind, and someone that then decided to share those teachings. And that's really the foundation of this practice for me as well. It's around how can I systematically train my mind, train my heart, and live in a world with others in which I can cultivate more happiness and less suffering, not just for
Mm-hmm.
myself, but for others as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You are very well spoken. And I feel like just by observing the way that you respond to these questions just says a lot about how much you have practiced and dedicated time and energy towards healing yourself and awakening. Um, yeah, just had to share that.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you.
As I was, doing my slight research, I stumbled upon this quote that you shared that says, slowing down is an act of love. And that does touch on, when we were talking about nature and slowing down and all of that. For those who are struggling to slow down or feel like slowing down isn't productive or don't really understand how slowing down can contribute goodness to their life, what would you say to them?
I think slowing down is hard for everyone, myself included. And we realize it is probably one of the greatest acts of self love we can do, because when we slow down, we can be present to ourselves. And often we're not present to ourselves. We're operating under conditions that are really put on us by society and by culture these days.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the last few, maybe up until the pandemic, there was such a culture of hustle. I remember reading so much about hustle culture and grinding, and those were the words that I used to always hear in the startup scene. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is still there, but I think we're now starting to realize that what are we hustling for? It doesn't actually add up, right? If we're
Mm-hmm.
going to get to an end point, but we're going to be sick and we're going to be stressed and anxious and on medications, and none of this is wrong. It's not an issue with that. But we can also work towards mitigating the potential of that happening as well. And slowing down is hard. I think it takes a lot of courage in a society that is asking us to speed up constantly. And that courage really has to come from the place of love. I don't think it
Mm-hmm.
can come from somewhere else. And yeah, I genuinely believe slowing down takes a lot of love and courage.
Yeah. Aside from needing to have or having to have in the society, and I totally agree, the courage to slow down, what have you personally felt you've had to have the courage for recently?
Mm. To feel emotions that I have avoided feeling.
Mm-hmm.
and to make space for a lot of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I think and I'm sure I'm not the only one here, but when you move from a different country into a space or a place that you don't know that many people, you realize the things that you had cultivated throughout your life for support were really there for so much more than just that, So community was always really big for me in Australia and in New York. And I always had a strong community. I had my routines, like, my yoga studio, my gym, my coffee shop. I had my parks that I would go to and go for walks.
Mm-hmm.
I had the kind of food, the healthy food I would order, all that sort of stuff. And then you're kind of thrown out of your nest somewhat when you migrate. And it's very unstable and uncomfortable. And, I found myself deep in the pandemic overeating as a way to soothe discomfort in my body. I found I was on social media a lot more than I wanted to. I found myself getting anxious in certain moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I allowed myself fully to just feel the weight of that and to acknowledge that it was real initially. But then, thanks to working with teachers and therapists and all of that, I was able to just hold space for what is a very human experience, right? Like anger isn't really bad, even though the wellness industry will tell you it's not a desired feeling or an emotional state. It's actually very potent and valuable. And so, for me, it's like feeling into emotions like anger and sadness and just being okay with feeling that and not trying to bypass that in any particular way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I personally can relate to that. I recently had like a realization that I have allowed myself to grieve in, towards the end of last year with so much going on personally, but I was still grieving with attachment to what was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, it's time to grieve with acceptance of what is no longer and how things are now. And so I can relate to the courage of allowing yourself to really feel what you may have not allowed yourself to feel.
Yeah, I think it's a really great example of acceptance, which is almost comes to us as like the last resort, which is so interesting, right? It's like I've tried everything else. I'm just gonna like deal with it now. And the irony of all of that is that if we just allowed ourselves to feel that initially, we would have moved through it, perhaps a bit quicker, perhaps not, but there would be less resistance and less tension along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You sharing with us your recent move to Los Angeles and migrating here and going to another country. To make such big moves, you have to feel called to do something like that, right? What was your calling?
On a practical level, I was sick of being a solo founder. So when I was in Australia, I founded A Space, which at the time was Australia's first drop-in meditation studio.
Mm-hmm.
And
congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And it was very difficult to do so many things by yourself, especially having to be the teacher and the businessman. And I did it for a number of years, and I was fundraising at the start of 2020. Had partners in New York, and I was literally going back on February 5th to Australia to pack everything up and then migrate to New York before the pandemic hit. So when that hit, again, my world turned upside down, and I ended up meeting Peter and Ride, who are my two co-founders at Open. And I initially started advising them, and they were a breathwork studio based out of San Francisco at that point. But we had a shared love and interest in mindfulness, and we knew that the mind, the body, and the breath were interconnected. And, within that space of like 2 or 3 months where we were working together, it just felt like a very natural relationship and a very natural fit. And so we decided to partner up, and, I joined as a co-founder of Open, and A Space was acquired. And so they were like, hey, the only catch is you'll have to move over here. And That was on a practical level. It was not wanting to be a solo founder. My girlfriend at the time was based in New York, and we were doing long distance from Australia to New York, which was very tiring and expensive. So
Mm-hmm.
it would give me a chance to be with her at that stage. And then also, I knew that what we were doing was really special, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see it anywhere else in the world. I didn't see other companies talking about the body as a place for healing in relationship to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought this was an incredible opportunity with an incredible team at a very incredible point in our life where almost everyone is feeling very disconnected from each other. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it didn't feel like it was a hard decision, tough in process, but the decision to make it just didn't feel that difficult to me at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, congrats on your first, founding and now, continuing to invest in the evolution of what you founded. I think that in itself also, of course, is very courageous. And, starting, touching on, the startup community and how we were talking about how it's like very much so like grind culture and all of that. I feel like because your business is rooted in mindfulness, like it also is challenging that founding culture in itself, and you really have to align yourself as not only spirit but as a business owner to continuing to manage a business, but in this more mindful way.
Yeah, it's a continuous work in progress, and um, I sometimes lose myself in work for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think self-care becomes so much more important, in environments like this, because even if we are all mindful in our own way, we report to investors and we report to shareholders, and we have targets and goals and all of that. So at least in the near future for us, it's not going to shift. So then we have to take stock of our personal sovereignty, and we have to reclaim that ourselves. And that means taking days off when we need to rest. That means saying no and putting up boundaries after hours. It means genuinely having a practice as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled initially for sure the first 4 or 5 months, and really in the last 3 or 4 months is when I've had a bit more of a balance and a grasp on things, and that's really come with the realization that I can't continue to show up and talk about these things if I'm not actually embodying them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also have another big milestone in your life recently, which is the publication of your book,
Hmm.
which was in March of this year.
That's right. Yeah.
Your book is titled Still Together. And I feel like to manifest a book, to bring a book to life in itself is a spiritual journey in itself. How was that experience for you to like really commit to not only commit to the manifestation and the actually making this book and writing it, but accepting, you know, the calling to bring this book to life? Was it challenging for you? Did you really have to pep talk yourself? Were there any insecurities you had to overcome to like really step into this power of being an author?
Yeah, all of the things. And a very special friend in my life once said, and she's an artist. She said that once you create a piece of art and you put it out into the world, it's no longer yours. And I had to really keep focusing on that. It's that because I'm someone that naturally overthinks a lot of things. And when you put words down on paper, it's there forever for the rest of your life and beyond your life. It's going to be a part of your legacy. And I'm talking about some topics that have been covered by masters, and fully enlightened beings. And so there was a lot of pressure I put on myself with these words. And so the process itself was interesting because I was writing a book about connection in the middle of a pandemic while I was living in Australia, and I was only allowed out of the house for an hour a day. So that process in and of itself was tremendously difficult. But then once I wrote the book, there was a sense of non-attachment to it. I wasn't really overly concerned about if we would sell well or if it would become a bestseller, partly because I was just so exhausted, and I didn't have the energy to do it. But partly I had a feeling that if this is meant to reach people, it will find its way there. And I genuinely think that's what has transpired. It's sold really well, ironically, which I'm very grateful for. But I think the feedback that I've had about the book and the things that people are saying, for me, means that it's gotten to the people that it was really meant to get to.
Yeah. In what ways did the writing of the book, or now that the book has, it's done, it's out, you've been a few months out of it already having been published, how has the book helped you find yourself, or how did it contribute? How did it impact you?
I think something I've struggled with throughout my life is this idea of fear. Fear in all its forms, fear of being exposed, that imposter syndrome, fear of not being good enough, all of those things. And you really have to confront those things when you produce a book, because you can't control who it goes out to. You can't control the reviews that come in. Everything is just out there. And when you put a book out and there is some element of marketing to that you have to put into it, you really have to understand fear. And for me, it was not trying to eliminate the fear and just simply be positive about it. It's that, I can still hold the fear and this can still be out in the world, and both can coexist. And there doesn't have to be a one or the other. So there are two truths at play. Like, I'm scared and I'm proud of this book. And so much of the writing of the book was wrapped up in that. It was around holding space for all that we are feeling.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that book. That's really big.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really proud of it.
I do want to touch on something that I feel is a big, part of your journey and your current state of being, and that's becoming a father. How do you feel fatherhood has played a role in your awareness, your spirituality, your way of being?
Yeah, I feel like I'm very much enmeshed in the role of the father. Very early on in my life, I became a father at 19, and my view on the world really changed. I think the immediacy of it really took me outside of my body for a few years whilst I adjusted to being responsible for someone else when I was very irresponsible myself, at that age, being very young and immature. But I also realized what it was like to be selfless in love. And I really developed an understanding of what unconditional love was, intuitively, and not even like, that it was shown to me. But, when you have another human that is reliant on you, you can do things and you can will yourself to do things that, you otherwise would not be able to do. And you realize that that's possible, not just with your child, but with anyone, with a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a partner, a dog, your work. You realize that level of care is available to you and present. But I also was amazed. I was there at the birth of my child, and I was just amazed at the female body and what it's capable of doing. And just my view towards women was, I think, forever changed at that moment, I was just in awe, like genuine, like awe of, wow, like this is just incredible. And I have continued to be amazed at the strength of women in my life, from my daughter's mother to my mother to my daughter herself,
Mm-hmm.
and just their level of depth of life and what they come into contact with, and what they endure and how they persevere. I've learned a lot from women in my life, for sure. So I think those things definitely left a mark on me, and I learned very on, love is really the goal of this existence. We talk a lot
Mm-hmm.
about liberation and freedom and enlightenment,
Mm-hmm.
but none of that would be possible without love. And
Yeah.
I think that's so much of our practice.
Yeah. 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 Love. I love love. It really is so powerful and so healing. And I pray that we all allow ourselves to be more receiving of
Mm,
the awakening that it comes with, the healing that it comes with, because it really is amazing.
mm.
I want to ask you a couple last questions to bring this full circle. What would you say is, one of your favorite recent self realizations?
There have been so many. Uh, I think that we tend to wear a lot of masks. And I think we all know this to some extent, but I had a very visceral realization of this, where unless we develop an understanding of ourselves and an acceptance of ourselves, just as we are,
Mm-hmm.
being authentic is really out of range for us. It's out of touch. And I also think living authentically and being our fully expressed selves is a form of enlightenment, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I catch myself putting on a mask, whether I'm, showing up for a podcast, whether I'm on a date, whether I'm, with my colleagues and my coworkers, there is a version that I want to portray to the other person of who I am, so I can be accepted in that moment. And it's a byproduct of our evolution as a species, for sure. But it's also something pretty profound and disruptive when we can just be ourselves in a moment and not necessarily crave acceptance outside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am actively trying to just be myself now in every moment that I can,
Mm-hmm.
and find compassion for the moments that I can't, that I catch myself trying to, put on a voice or put on a persona of someone that I'm not really at this moment. So that's been pretty big in my life recently.
Yeah. How would you describe the most authentic version of Manoj?
I love to dance. Like, the most authentic version of me is like at a house party, I'll either be in one or two places next to the food and the chips and the guac, or on the dance floor, like just dancing. And for whatever reason, when I became a businessman, when I became an entrepreneur, I really lost that joie de vivre, and, really lost that lust for being in my body and being present and being joyous, because from a very young age, I loved to dance. And I think I looked at it as something that was just, I didn't have time for, and it was just a luxury. And now I'm seeing it as a form of liberation, in every moment that I can spend a few moments in being in my body. Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Either by the food or dancing, two reflections of self-nourishment.
And then those aren't mutually exclusive. I could be on the dance floor with food as well. Like, it's happened before.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's, I love that you answered that question with like an action, not necessarily like characteristics, but something that brings out the most authentic version of you. And that's just you just dancing and
Mm.
vibing to frequency.
Right.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we got to touch on so much, and I just want to congratulate you again on just everything, like founding your business as a solo founder, which I know must have been a lot, to allowing your business to evolve and really following your calling and making the move to coming here, which was huge, to just really dedicating yourself to healing. I always really like to really acknowledge that when I see it in others, because it's so important that we encourage each other, you know, in our efforts to just be better. So,
Mm.
congratulations on all of
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, and maybe just a slight edit to that. I don't think it's necessarily our efforts to be better. It's maybe our efforts to be more accepting. Um,
Mm,
I offer that small edit because I think for a long time I kept thinking I had to be better, and then I realized
mm,
I just had to be myself, and that has been a profound shift in my life.
yeah, I love that. I'm going to keep all of it as is so everyone can hear. I'm always open to being offered another perspective. Be more accepting rather than, yeah, because I guess when you strive to be better, it makes you feel like you're not good enough.
Yeah, and we have a culture that's built around that, right? If we don't
Mm-hmm.
feel good or if we don't feel like we're not enough, we're marketed different things. And I think it's a little revolutionary to just believe you're whole and complete.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time and energy. I'm excited to share this conversation and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jocelyn.